Think about the last time you sat down for a warm meal. You probably saw a small glass shaker filled with tiny black grains sitting next to the salt. When you shake it over your food, a sharp and spicy smell fills the air. This dark powder adds a biting heat that makes every bite taste much better. It is so common today that we often forget how special it is. However, thousands of years ago, this simple spice was as valuable as shiny gold. To find its true origin, we must travel back in time to a very hot and beautiful place. The long story of pepper began in the rainy jungles of South India along the Malabar coast. Local people discovered a climbing plant that grew small green berries in the deep shade. They soon learned a wonderful secret about these little fruits. When they dried the berries under the hot sun, they turned black and spicy. This spice was very important because it made food taste better and lasted a long time. Farmers worked hard to grow these tiny seeds for thousands of years. Eventually, traders from different lands heard about this black gold and wanted to buy it for their kings. It was the start of a very long journey across the big world. Many centuries later, the powerful Roman Empire became the most influential force in the ancient world. Their lands stretched from the cold hills of Britain to the hot sands of Egypt. The people of Rome were very curious about the treasures found in distant lands across the sea. They wanted the finest silks and the most beautiful jewels to decorate their homes. However, there was one special thing from the East that they desired more than almost anything else. This small item was the black pepperberry from the rainy jungles of India. It soon became a symbol of their incredible power and reach. For the wealthy citizens living in the busy city of Rome, food was much more than just a way to stay alive. Eating was a grand performance meant to impress friends and rivals. Rich families hosted large parties where they served many exotic dishes to their guests. They used a huge amount of pepper to give their meat and vegetables a sharp and exciting flavor. Because pepper came from a land thousands of miles away, using it was a clear sign of success. A host who served pepper was telling the world that they possessed great wealth and very important connections. The journey to bring this dark spice to the Roman capital was incredibly long and full of many dangers. Traders had to travel across vast deserts and sail through rough waters to reach the southern coast of India. Because the trip took many months and required a lot of courage, the price of pepper remained extremely high. In fact, pepper was so valuable that it was often kept in strong boxes like gold or silver. Only the most successful merchants could afford to buy large quantities of these tiny black seeds. For many centuries, pepper was the most expensive ingredient in the entire Roman kitchen. One very famous Roman man named Apicius wrote a book filled with many different recipes for the wealthy. In this ancient book, he included pepper in nearly 9 out of every 10 dishes he described. Romans did not just use pepper on meat or fish like we do today. They also added it to sweet fruits, honey cakes, and even their glasses of red wine. They believed that the strong heat of the spice made the natural flavors of the food taste even better. This obsession with the spice changed the way people cooked across the Mediterranean for a very long time. Because pepper was so rare and expensive, the Roman government started to treat it like a type of money. People would sometimes pay their taxes to the emperor using small bags of these spicy berries instead of metal coins. If a man owed a large debt to his neighbor, he might offer pepper to settle the payment fairly. The city of Rome even built massive stone buildings called the pepper warehouses to store all the spice arriving from the east. These giant buildings were heavily guarded by soldiers because the seeds inside were worth more than a huge pile of sparkling jewelry. To keep the spice flowing into the city, the Romans built a fleet of massive wooden ships. These ships were much larger than anything seen before in the ancient world. They sailed from the ports of Egypt and traveled across the wide Indian Ocean during the summer months. The sailors learned how to use the strong monsoon winds to push their heavy ships quickly toward the coast of India. This was a very clever discovery that allowed them to complete the long journey in much less time. Each year, more than 100 ships made this difficult trip to fetch the spice. When the ships arrived in India, the Roman traders exchanged their heavy gold and silver coins for thousands of pounds of pepper. This trade was so massive that some Roman leaders began to worry about their economy. A famous writer named Pliny the Elder complained that too much Roman money was leaving the empire every single year. He believed that the Roman people were spending far too much gold just to make their food taste a little bit more spicy. Despite these serious warnings, the people of Rome refused to give up their favorite ingredient. Their love for the dark spice was simply too strong. The life of a spice trader was not easy, because the seas were full of many hungry pirates and terrible storms. Many ships were lost to the waves, and many brave men never returned home to their families. However, the promise of making a giant profit was enough to keep the trade routes busy for hundreds of years. Every time a ship returned safely to the port, the price of pepper in the Roman market would change. If many ships arrived at once, the price went down. But if the sea was angry and ships were lost, the cost of pepper would rise to incredible levels. Even the Roman army understood the great value of this spicy berry from the east. When foreign tribes tried to attack the city of Rome, they sometimes asked for pepper as a ransom to stop their fighting. One famous story tells of an army that demanded 3,000 pounds of pepper to leave the city in peace. This shows that everyone, from the highest emperor to the fiercest soldier, recognized the power of pepper. It was a global currency that connected different cultures through the simple act of trade. This small berry had become a key part of how the ancient world functioned. During the Middle Ages, the world felt like a very large and mysterious place for most people living in the continent of Europe. Most villagers stayed in their small towns and never traveled more than a few miles from their homes. Life was often difficult, and the food was very simple, consisting mostly of bread and basic vegetables. However, inside the tall stone walls of the great castles, life looked very different for the kings and queens. These powerful rulers wanted to show their high status by eating expensive food that smelled like flowers and exotic lands. They looked toward the Far East to find something truly special. Pepper was the most important treasure of the medieval kitchen, and it became a symbol of great power. Only the wealthiest families could afford to buy even a small amount of this dark spice from the merchants. Because it traveled thousands of miles across mountains and oceans, the price was high enough to buy a house or a horse. People often called it black gold because it was just as valuable as the shiny metal found in the ground. When a rich lord held a feast, he made sure his servants put plenty of pepper on every plate of meat to impress his many guests. To keep this precious spice safe, people did not put it in simple jars on the kitchen shelf like we do today. Instead, they treated pepper like beautiful jewelry or expensive silver coins. Wealthy families kept their black seeds inside heavy wooden boxes with strong metal locks to prevent anyone from stealing them. Sometimes, the head of the house carried the key to the spice box around his neck or on his belt at all times. Losing a handful of pepper was considered a great tragedy because it represented a huge amount of money and social influence in the local community during those many years. The city of Venice in Italy became the center of the spice world during this interesting period of human history. Smart merchants from Venice built large and fast ships to travel across the blue Mediterranean Sea. They met with other traders from distant lands, who brought the pepper from the hot jungles of India. These Italian businessmen controlled the main routes and became the richest people in the world by selling the spice to the rest of Europe. Because they had a monopoly, they could decide the price and make sure they always earned a massive profit from every single tiny black seed they sold. The journey that a single pepper berry took to reach a European table was long and full of many dangers. First, it traveled on small boats across the Indian Ocean, and then it moved on the backs of camels across vast deserts. These caravans faced many risks such as sandstorms, lack of water, and attacks from groups of thieves hiding in the hills. Every time the spice moved from one trader to another, the price went up, because everyone wanted to earn some money. By the time the pepper reached the busy markets of Europe, it was a very luxury item for the lucky few. In the Middle Ages, pepper was so valuable that people actually used it instead of gold coins to pay their bills. If a farmer owed money to his landlord, he could sometimes pay his rent with a small bag of dried pepper berries. Sometimes, a king might give a bag of spice to a brave soldier as a reward for winning a difficult battle in the war. It was even used in marriage agreements, when a father wanted to provide a good life for his daughter. This shows us that the spice was much more than just a simple ingredient for cooking in those ancient times. Medieval doctors also believed that pepper had special powers to heal the body and keep people healthy during the cold winter months. They thought that the heat of the spice could help to balance the cold inside a person who felt sick or tired. Because of these beliefs, people were even more desperate to find and buy the spice at any cost. They would mix a little bit of pepper with wine or honey to create a strong medicine for their families. This made the demand for the black gold grow even higher as the long years passed across the continent of Europe. The great kings of Europe were not happy about the high prices they had to pay to the Venetian merchants. They knew that there must be a way to reach the spice lands without going through so many different middlemen. Every time they looked at their gold, they thought about the beautiful pepper plants growing in the distant east. They began to talk to their best sailors about finding a new path across the unknown oceans. This desire for cheaper spice started to change how people thought about the map of the world and what might lie beyond the horizon for their nations. As the Middle Ages slowly came to an end, the love for pepper continued to grow among the noble families. They loved the sharp and biting taste it added to their roasted meats and thick stews. At big banquets, the servants would bring out a large bowl of pepper, just so the guests could smell the rich and spicy aroma. It was a way to show that the host was a man of the world, who had connections to faraway places. This deep hunger for the black spice was about to push brave explorers into the dark and unknown waters of the big world. In the year 1497, the world was on the edge of a massive change. For many decades, the brave people of Portugal looked at the dark and mysterious Atlantic Ocean with great wonder. King Manuel I wanted to find a secret path to the eastern lands where spices grew in abundance. He knew that if his sailors could reach India by water, his kingdom would become the richest in all of Europe. The king chose a determined man named Vasco da Gama to lead this dangerous mission into the unknown waters of the Great Southern Sea. Before this time, getting pepper was a very slow and expensive process for everyone involved. Merchants had to travel across dry deserts and high mountains on the backs of camels for many months. Every time the spice moved from one trader to another, the price went up because of high taxes and greedy middlemen. By the time a small bag of black pepper reached a kitchen in London or Paris, it cost as much as a precious diamond. The European kings were tired of paying so much money to the merchants who lived in the city of Venice. Vasco da Gama left the harbor with 4 strong wooden ships and about 170 brave men. They did not have modern maps or special tools to guide them through the giant waves of the ocean. The sailors were often afraid of sea monsters or falling off the edge of the flat world. However, their desire for the black gold was much stronger than their fear of the deep blue water. They packed enough dried meat and hard bread to last for many months of sailing under the hot sun and through the cold, stormy nights. As they sailed south along the long coast of Africa, the sailors saw many new animals and strange lands. They spent many weeks without seeing any ground at all, while they fought against the powerful winds of the Atlantic. Many men became sick because they did not have fresh fruit or vegetables to eat during the long journey. Finally, they reached the southern tip of the continent, which people called the Cape of Good Hope. This was a very important moment because it meant they could finally turn their ships toward the east and the legendary spice markets of India. After crossing into the Indian Ocean, the Portuguese explorers met many different people who already knew the secrets of the sea. They found experienced pilots who understood how the seasonal winds, called monsoons, could help a ship move very quickly across the water. These local experts guided the Europeans toward the famous Malabar coast of India, where the pepper plants grew in the warm rain. In the month of May, in the year 1498, the 4 ships finally arrived at the busy port of Calicut. This event would change the history of the entire world forever. When the Portuguese sailors walked into the city, they were amazed by the incredible wealth and the variety of goods. They saw piles of cinnamon, mountains of ginger, and of course, many large bags filled with spicy black pepper. The local ruler, known as the Zamarin, was a very powerful man who wore beautiful clothes and expensive jewels. At first, he was not very impressed by the simple gifts that the Europeans brought from their distant home. The Portuguese realized that they would need more than just cloth and bells to trade for the valuable spices they wanted so badly. Despite the early difficulties with the local rulers, Vasco da Gama managed to collect a small amount of spices to take back home. The journey back to Portugal was very hard, and many of his sailors died from hunger and disease along the way. However, when the remaining ships finally returned to the city of Lisbon, the king was extremely happy with the results. The pepper they brought back was worth 60 times more than the total cost of the entire expedition. This huge profit proved that the sea route to India was the key to gaining massive wealth and power. Word of this incredible discovery spread quickly across the continent of Europe and made other kings very jealous. Spain, England, and the Netherlands soon began to build their own large fleets of ships to follow the path of the Portuguese. They all wanted to control the spice trade and get rich from the tiny black berries of the Indian jungle. This led to a period of fierce competition and many violent battles on the high seas. Each nation wanted to be the only one allowed to buy and sell the famous black gold that everyone in the world desired. To protect their business interests, these European countries created powerful organizations like the East India Company. They built strong stone forts along the coast of India and Africa to guard their ships and their valuable cargo of pepper. For hundreds of years, these companies acted like small governments with their own armies and their own laws. They fought long and bloody wars against each other to decide who would have the right to visit the spice ports. The simple search for a better way to season food had turned into a global struggle for control and empire. During the 1800s, the world began to change very quickly because of many new inventions. This era was often called the Industrial Revolution, and it touched every part of human life, including the global spice trade. For many centuries, bringing pepper from India to Europe was a slow and dangerous journey that took many months on wooden sailing ships. However, as the 1900s approached, the way people moved goods across the ocean became much more efficient. These new machines helped farmers and traders send their spicy blackberries to many distant lands, much faster than they ever could before in history. One of the biggest changes during this time was the invention of the powerful steam engine. Large ships made of strong iron began to replace the old wooden vessels that relied only on the wind. These steamships did not have to wait for the perfect weather or specific seasons to cross the vast oceans. They could travel in a straight line across the deep blue water, reaching their destinations in half the time. This meant that fresh pepper could arrive at the big city ports while it still had its strong smell and its sharp, biting flavor for the curious customers. In the year 1869, a very important project was finished that changed the spice trade forever. Workers created the Suez Canal, a long water path that connected the Mediterranean Sea to the Red Sea. Before this canal existed, ships had to sail all the way around the giant continent of Africa to reach the spice lands. Now, the journey from India to Europe was thousands of miles shorter and much safer for the sailors. This shortcut allowed merchants to bring much more pepper to the markets every single year, which helped the supply grow very quickly for everyone. As the production of pepper grew, farmers started to plant these special vines in many other tropical places around the world. While India was still very important, new plantations appeared in the islands of Indonesia and the warm jungles of Vietnam. Even countries in South America, like the large nation of Brazil, began to grow their own pepper crops in the hot sun. Because the plant could now grow in so many different regions, the world was no longer dependent on just one small coast. This global expansion meant that there was always plenty of spice available for the growing number of hungry buyers. During this time, the way farmers took care of their plants also became much more scientific and organized. Agricultural experts studied the pepper vines to understand how to keep them healthy and how to produce more berries from each plant. They learned better ways to dry the spice under the sun so that it would stay fresh during the long trips across the sea. These improvements meant that the quality of the pepper stayed very high, even as the quantity increased. This focus on better farming ensured that the global demand for this sharp spice could always be met by the hard-working growers. With so much pepper being grown and moved across the world, something very interesting happened to the price. For over 2,000 years, pepper was so expensive that only the richest people could afford to use it. It was a symbol of power that stayed on the tables of wealthy lords and powerful queens. However, during the 1800s, the price finally began to drop significantly because there was such a large supply. This was a wonderful turning point in history because it meant that the average person could finally experience the joy of seasoning their own simple meals at home. Small shops and general stores in busy towns began to stock jars of black pepper on their wooden shelves. Working families who lived in small houses could now walk to the market and buy a small amount of spice for a few coins. It was no longer kept in locked boxes or treated like expensive jewelry in a safe place. Instead, it became a common sight in the kitchen, sitting next to the flour and the sugar. The spicy black berries were now a friendly part of daily life, helping to make ordinary soup and bread taste much more exciting and delicious. Technology also helped in the way that people processed the pepper once it arrived in the big cities. Large factories used new machines to clean and sort the dried berries into different sizes and qualities. Some machines were even built to grind the whole peppercorns into a fine, dark powder that was easy for people to use immediately. This pre-ground pepper was very convenient for busy cooks who did not have much time to prepare their meals. The rise of these modern food companies helped to make pepper a standard ingredient that everyone expected to find in their local grocery store. The way people communicated also improved during this busy century because of the invention of the telegraph. In the 1850s, merchants could send messages across long distances almost instantly using electric wires. This fast information made the global spice market much more stable and helped keep the prices fair. By the end of the 1800s, pepper had transformed from a luxury for kings into a common treasure for everyone. The hard work of millions and the power of new machines had finally turned the rare black gold into a simple, everyday item that improved common meals. In the modern world, black pepper is the most popular and common spice across the entire globe. You can find a pepper shaker on almost every dining table, sitting next to the salt in every single country. While it is no longer worth its weight in gold, people still value its sharp and biting taste in their favorite recipes. Modern machines now grind millions of tons of pepper every year to satisfy the global demand for this ancient berry. It is no longer just for kings or rich merchants, because everyone can enjoy its spicy flavor today in their own kitchens. From its humble start in the hot Indian jungle to its permanent place in every home, the story of pepper shows how one small plant changed human history. Today, farmers in many different countries grow these green vines to produce the spice we love so much. Whether it is on a fresh pizza or in a hot soup, this special ingredient adds a wonderful kick to our food. It remains a very important part of our shared human culture and global trade across the 7 continents. If you have listened this far, please like and subscribe to follow our next videos.